The whispers started before I even made it through the church doors. I could feel their eyes on my back, judging my simple navy dress that I'd spent 3 months savings on. My name is Scarlett, and today I'm watching my eldest son marry into a family that thinks I'm not good enough to breathe the same air as them. Did you see what his mother is wearing? The stage whisper carried from somewhere behind me. I heard she works as a housekeeper. I straightened my spine and kept walking, the way I've done for the past 28 years since losing my husband. The church pews were filling up quickly, designer dresses on one side, modest Sunday best on the other. A perfect visual representation of the divide between the Grants and us common folk. Mom. Milton appeared at my elbow, my younger son's face tight with concern. You okay? I can still cause a scene and get us out of here. I squeezed his hand. I'm fine, honey. This is Hugo's day. But was it really? I watched my eldest son standing at the altar, shifting nervously in his expensive new suit, a gift from his future in-laws. The Hugo I raised would have been comfortable in his own clothes, but Lauren had made it clear from day one that he needed to elevate himself. Mrs. Gomez, Lauren's mother Josephine swooped in, air kissing near my cheek. So glad you could make it. We weren't sure if you'd be able to get the day off work. I wouldn't miss my son's wedding, I replied, keeping my voice steady, though I'm surprised you found time in your busy social schedule. Josephine's plastic smile flickered. Before she could respond, the wedding march began. Everyone stood, turning to watch Lauren float down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than my annual salary. She was beautiful, I'll give her that, but beauty only runs skin deep. During the ceremony, I kept my eyes fixed on Hugo's face, searching for signs of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. The boy who helped me clean houses on weekends so we could afford his college textbooks. Now he was promising his life to a woman who'd never worked a day in hers. If anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace. My hand twitched in my lap. Milton grabbed it, squeezing hard. We both knew what was at stake, what I was holding on to. The reception was worse. I was seated at a table far from the main party, surrounded by distant relatives who looked as uncomfortable as I felt. Lauren's voice carried across the room as she held court with her bridesmaids. Can you believe his mother? That dress looks like it came from a thrift store. Laughter followed. I told Hugo we need to distance ourselves after the wedding. I mean, what will people think? They'll think you married a man who loves his mother, I said clearly, standing up. The conversations around us died. Lauren's face went from smug to shocked as she realized I was right behind her. Oh, Mrs. Gomez, I was just making sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you are. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Don't worry, sweetheart. They'll know soon enough. I walked away, leaving silence in my wake. Jillian, my best friend since childhood, caught up with me at the bar. You're not going to let them get away with this, are you? She whispered, ordering us both a glass of wine. I watched Forrest Grant, Lauren's father, deep in conversation with Hugo. The way he kept glancing in my direction told me everything I needed to know about their topic of discussion. No, I said, taking a sip of wine. I've spent years being the bigger person, Jillian. Years of sacrifice and hard work, raising my boys alone, and now they think they can just walk in and erase me? What are you going to do? I touched the small envelope in my purse, the one containing documents that would change everything. I'm going to give them exactly what they deserve, just not in the way they expect. Milton appeared beside us, his face flushed with anger. Mom, you won't believe what I just overheard Lauren's parents saying. They're planning to. I know, honey. I patted his arm. But don't worry, your father left us more than just memories. He left us a way to make sure justice gets served. I watched Lauren and her parents laughing with their wealthy friends, probably already planning how to remake Hugo in their image. They had no idea what was coming. Sometimes revenge isn't about getting even, it's about revealing the truth. And I had 28 years worth of truth ready to spill. The morning after the wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the inheritance papers while Milton paced behind me. The coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. I still can't believe what they said about you, Mom, Milton muttered, running his hands through his hair. Did you see how they seated you? Like you were some distant relative instead of the groom's mother. Sit down, honey. There's something I need to show you. I pulled out the yellowed envelope I'd kept hidden for nearly 3 decades. Your father was smarter than anyone gave him credit for. Milton's eyes widened as I spread the documents across the table. Is that everything? I nodded. The house, the land downtown, the trust fund. It's all in my name. Your father knew the Grants would come sniffing around eventually. He'd had dealings with Forrest before. But Hugo said Lauren's dad was helping him invest in some property downtown. I laughed without humor. The same property your father left to us. Forrest's been trying to get his hands on that land for years. Now he thinks marrying his daughter to Hugo will give him access. The doorbell rang, interrupting us. Through the window, I saw Jillian holding up a bottle of wine and takeout bags. Just what we needed. I brought reinforcements, she announced, sweeping in. And you won't believe what I overheard at the salon this morning. Josephine was there, bragging about how they're going to help Hugo manage his inheritance. What inheritance? Milton snorted. They think we're broke. Let them think that for now, I said, pouring wine into coffee mugs. We'd never been fancy enough for proper wine glasses. Your father made me promise to wait until the right moment. Jillian picked up one of the documents. Holy Scarlet, this is worth millions now. That downtown lot alone is exactly what Forrest wants to develop into luxury condos. I finished. He's been buying up everything around it. Our lot is the missing piece he needs. The front door opened again, and Hugo walked in. He looked exhausted, his new suit wrinkled from the night before. Mom? He stopped short, taking in the papers on the table. What's all this? Sit down, son. I pulled out a chair. There's something you need to know about your new in-laws. Lauren's parents are taking us to dinner tonight, he said, avoiding my eyes. They want to discuss some business opportunities. I bet they do. Milton couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. Did they mention how they treated Mom at the wedding? They're just different from us, Hugo defended weakly. Lauren says we need to adapt to their world. Their world? I stood up, my voice sharp. The world where they mock your mother? Where they pretend 28 years of sacrifice means nothing? Mom, please. No, you need to hear this. I handed him the property deed. Your father knew people like Forrest. That's why he left everything in my name. He knew they'd try to take advantage. Hugo's face paled as he read. This can't be right. The land downtown, Lauren's dad said it was worthless. Worth about $15 million now, Jillian chimed in. And that's just the land value. They're using you, honey. I touched his hand. Just like they used your father all those years ago. The only difference is, this time we're ready for them. Hugo's phone buzzed, Lauren's face lighting up the screen. He stared at it, then declined the call. What are you going to do? He asked quietly. First, I'm going to that dinner tonight. I gathered the papers, returning them to their envelope. And then I'm going to show them exactly who they're dealing with. I'm coming with you, Milton declared. No, I shook my head. I need you to take these papers to my lawyer. Hugo, you go to dinner with Lauren like nothing's wrong. Let her parents think their plan is working. Scarlett, Jillian warned, be careful. People like the Grants. They're not used to losing. I thought about all the nights I'd worked multiple jobs to put food on the table, the birthdays I'd missed because I was cleaning other people's houses, the way Lauren's mother looked at me like I was something stuck to her shoe. Neither am I said, finishing my wine. They think money makes them untouchable, but they're about to learn that a mother's love is worth more than any trust fund. Hugo stood up, his face set in determination I hadn't seen since he was a boy. I need to know everything, Mom. Everything Dad told you about Forrest. Then sit back down, I said, pulling out another envelope. Because this story starts long before you met Lauren. The truth was about to come out, and the Grants had no idea what they'd started by underestimating me. The restaurant Forrest chose screamed old money, with crystal chandeliers and waiters who looked more expensive than my car. I smoothed down my dress, the same one from the wedding, and walked in with my head high. Mrs. Gomez, the hostess said, her tone shifting from welcoming to barely civil when she saw me. The Grant party is already seated. I spotted them at a corner table, Lauren draped in another designer outfit, Hugo looking uncomfortable in his new suit. Forrest stood as I approached, his smile not reaching his eyes. Scarlett, we weren't sure you'd join us. He gestured to an empty chair, the one furthest from Hugo. I wouldn't miss it, I replied, taking the seat next to my son instead. Lauren's face tightened. Mother, she hissed at Josephine, I thought you said, wine? Josephine cut her off, signaling a waiter. We've ordered a lovely bottle of Chateau something or other. Just water for me, I smiled. I like to keep my head clear for business discussions. The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. Forrest set down his menu slowly. Business discussions? Isn't that why we're here? I pulled out my phone, checking the time. My lawyer should be finishing up with those papers Milton brought him. Hugo coughed into his napkin, hiding a smile. Lauren's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. Papers? Josephine's voice rose slightly. What papers? Oh, you know, I waved dismissively. Just some property documents. That downtown lot you've been discussing with Hugo. Forrest's face reddened. That worthless piece of land? I was merely trying to help Hugo understand real estate. Worthless? I laughed. Is that why you've spent the last 5 years buying up everything around it? Why you pushed this wedding forward right when the city approved the new development plans? Mom, Lauren whined, what are you talking about? Daddy's just trying to help Hugo succeed. Like he helped my husband succeed? The words came out sharp as knives. Should I tell them about that, Forrest? About how you convinced Robert to sell his shares right before the company value tripled? Forrest's knuckles went white around his fork. Ancient history. Business is business. Yes, it is. I pulled out a single document from my purse, which is why I found it interesting that you've already started paperwork to transfer ownership of my property into your company's name, using Hugo's marriage as leverage. Lauren gasped. Hugo turned to her, his expression hardening. Did you know about this? Daddy said it was just business. She grabbed his arm. It doesn't change anything between us. Actually, I slid the paper across the table. It changes everything. This is a cease and desist letter from my lawyer. Touch my property again, and we'll see you in court. Josephine stood up so quickly, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Several diners turned to look. How dare you, she hissed. After we welcomed you into our family. Welcomed? I stayed seated, keeping my voice calm. Is that what you call mocking me at my son's wedding? Seating me with the caterers? Planning to steal my property? We can work something out, Forrest said quickly, his businessman mask slipping back on. A partnership, perhaps? Split the profits. Like you split profits with Robert? I stood now, gathering my purse. My husband trusted you once, Forrest. That trust cost him everything. I won't make the same mistake. Hugo, Lauren pleaded, tell her to stop. We love each other. Hugo looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. Do we? Or do you love what your father thought he could get from me? This isn't over, Forrest growled, but I could see the fear behind his anger. You're right, I agreed. It's not. The press conference is tomorrow. I think people will be very interested in hearing about how the great Forrest Grant tries to swindle widows and manipulate marriages for profit. You wouldn't dare? Try me. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Lauren, that dress you're wearing? I cleaned houses for 3 years to buy Hugo his first suit. He wore it to his father's funeral. But you're right. What would people think of that? I walked out of the restaurant with my head high, Hugo right behind me. Outside, he grabbed my arm. Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have seen. It's not your fault. I hugged him tight. Love makes us blind sometimes. But now you see. My phone buzzed, a text from Milton. Papers filed. Lawyer says they can't touch us. What now? Hugo asked as we walked to my car. Now? I smiled. Now we show them what real family loyalty looks like, and maybe teach them that money isn't everything. The game wasn't over, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally playing with a full deck. The press conference room at the downtown Marriott buzzed with anticipation. Local reporters filled every seat, their cameras trained on the empty podium. Milton stood by the door, checking his phone. Lawrence called 6 times in the last hour, he whispered as I adjusted my blazer. Another loan from Jillian. Her father's lawyer, too. Let them call. I glanced at my watch. Is Hugo ready? In position, Jillian's got the PowerPoint queued up. The room hushed as I approached the podium. Camera flashes burst like lightning, and I gripped the edges of the lectern to steady myself. Thank you all for coming, I began, my voice stronger than I felt. 28 years ago, my husband Robert made a decision that cost him everything. Today, I'm here to ensure history doesn't repeat itself. The door burst open. Forrest strode in, Josephine and Lauren trailing behind him like designer-clad ducklings. Their lawyer scurried after them, briefcase clutched to his chest. This is slander, Forrest shouted. We'll sue. Please take a seat. I gestured to the empty chairs in the front row. You'll want to see this. The first slide appeared behind me, documents showing Forrest's failed attempts to transfer my property using Hugo's marriage certificate. 3 days ago, this man tried to steal my family's property through manipulating my son's marriage to his daughter. Cameras swiveled to capture Forrest's reddening face. But that's not where this story begins. Next slide, newspaper clippings from 28 years ago. In 1995, Forrest convinced my husband to sell his shares in their joint venture for pennies on the dollar. A week later, the company's value tripled. I looked directly at Lauren. Your father built his empire on broken trust and stolen dreams. That's a lie. Josephine stood up. We have proof. Like these? Hugo emerged from the side door, carrying a stack of folders. He began distributing them to reporters. Bank records showing how my father's signature was forged on the final transfer documents. Lauren gasped. Hugo, what are you doing? Finding out who you really are. He didn't look at her as he passed. Who your family really is. The lawyer jumped up, waving papers. We have a cease and desist. Funny thing about those, Milton called from the back. They only work if you have legal standing, which you lost when we found the original property deeds. He held up his phone. Just got confirmation from the DA's office. They're very interested in these forgery allegations. Cameras clicked frantically as Forrest's face went from red to white. Josephine grabbed Lauren's arm, pulling her toward the door, but reporters blocked their path. Mrs. Gomez, a journalist called out, "What do you want?" "Justice." I straightened my shoulders, and to show that money doesn't make you untouchable. My husband died believing he'd failed his family, but he left us something more valuable than wealth. He left us the truth. "This is ridiculous," Lauren shrieked. "Hugo, tell them. Tell them we love each other." Hugo walked to the podium, standing beside me. "Do we? Or was I just your father's ticket to my mother's property?" The next slide showed Lauren's text messages to her father. "He's totally clueless, Daddy. Just get him to sign the papers after the wedding." The room erupted in chaos. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and Lauren burst into tears, real ones this time, not the delicate drops she'd perfected for social occasions. "You've ruined everything," she screamed at me. "No, honey." I shook my head. "You did that all by yourself." Forrest lunged for the podium, but security guards appeared from nowhere, restraining him. His lawyer was already on the phone, sweat beading on his forehead. "This isn't over," Forrest threatened as they led him away. "Actually, it is." I held up my phone. "The DA just approved the warrant. They're searching your offices as we speak." The reporters surged forward, questions overlapping. "Mrs. Gomez, will you press charges?" "Hugo, what about the marriage?" "Ms. Grant, any comment on the forgery allegations?" I stepped back, letting Hugo take the microphone. "My mother taught me that real wealth isn't in bank accounts," he said clearly. "It's in how you treat people, and I've seen enough to know which side I'm choosing." Lauren fled the room, mascara streaming down her face. Josephine hurried after her, leaving her designer purse behind in her haste. As the reporters dispersed, Jillian appeared at my side. That was better than any revenge movie I've ever seen. "It's not about revenge," I said, watching Hugo hug Milton. "It's about truth and family." "Speaking of family," Milton grinned. "Guess who just called? Dad's old business partner. Says he has some stories about Forrest that the DA might find interesting." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Then I guess this isn't over quite yet." The truth was finally out, and it felt better than any revenge I could have planned. The morning after the press conference, my small kitchen could barely contain the energy buzzing through it. Hugo sat at the table, papers spread everywhere, while Milton and Jillian huddled over a laptop. "Another email from Lauren," Milton announced, scrolling through his phone. "This one's just crying emojis and exclamation points. Her father's been arrested." Jillian looked up from the laptop. "It's all over the news. The DA found more than just forged documents in those offices." The doorbell rang. Hugo tensed, but I waved him down. "It's probably just another reporter." Instead, I opened the door to find Josephine, her perfect makeup unable to hide her red-rimmed eyes. "Please," she said quietly. "5 minutes." I hesitated, then stepped aside. The kitchen fell silent as she walked in, her designer heels clicking against my worn linoleum floor. "Well," she said, taking in the scene, "I suppose this is what winning looks like." "This isn't about winning," I replied. "This is about justice." "Justice?" She laughed bitterly. "My husband's in jail. My daughter's marriage is over. Our reputation is ruined." "Mom," Hugo started, but I held up my hand. "Your husband ruined his own life," I said firmly, "just like he tried to ruin my husband's. The only difference is, this time there was evidence." Josephine sank into a kitchen chair, looking oddly small without her usual armor of designer clothes and superiority. "We're not all bad people," she whispered. "Lauren really did love Hugo." "No," Milton cut in, holding up his phone. "She loved what he represented. Look at these texts between her and her friends. Just have to play the loving wife until Daddy gets the property. That's not love." Josephine's face crumpled. "I taught her that, to always look for advantage, to use people as stepping stones. I thought, I thought that's what strong women did. Strong women? I pulled out a chair across from her. Let me tell you about strong women. Strong women work 3 jobs to put their kids through college. They skip meals so their children can eat. They don't step on others to climb higher. The police found evidence of other frauds, Jillian added gently. Other families' forests destroyed. Did you know about those too? Josephine shook her head, tears falling freely now. I never asked. It was easier not to know. Hugo stood up suddenly. I need to see Lauren one last time. She's at the plaza, Josephine said. Room 542. She won't leave the room. As Hugo grabbed his keys, Milton called after him. Want me to come? No, Hugo replied. This is something I need to do alone. After he left, Josephine pulled out a thick envelope. I found these in Forrest's study last night. Letters from Robert, your husband. He wrote to Forrest for years, begging him to tell the truth. My hands shook as I took the envelope. He never told me he wrote letters. There's more, she continued. Bank statements showing where the money went. Names of other victims. I'm giving it all to the DA. Why? Milton asked suspiciously. Because, she stood up, straightening her shoulders. Maybe it's time I learned what real strength looks like. The door opened again and Hugo walked back in, his face pale. That was quick, I said. She wasn't alone. His voice was tight. She was with her ex-boyfriend, planning their escape to Europe, using money from my accounts. Josephine covered her face with her hands. Oh, Lauren. I recorded everything, Hugo said. Already sent it to the DA. They're heading there now. My phone buzzed, a news alert showing Forrest being led out of the police station in handcuffs. They're denying him bail, Jillian read over my shoulder. Too many charges, too much evidence of ongoing fraud. I should go. Josephine stood. Lauren will need someone, even if she doesn't deserve it. At the door, she turned back. Scarlett, I'm sorry for everything. You're twice the woman I'll ever be. After she left, Milton let out a long breath. Well, that was intense. It's not over, I said, looking at Robert's letters. These people, there are more victims out there, more families who deserve justice. What are you thinking, Mom? Hugo asked. I picked up one of the letters, my husband's familiar handwriting bringing tears to my eyes. I'm thinking it's time to finish what your father started. Time to make things right. Count me in, Jillian said immediately. Us too. Milton nodded at Hugo. Family sticks together, right? I looked around my small kitchen, at my real family, not bound by money or status, but by love and loyalty. The truth had cost us a lot, but it had given us something priceless in return. Our dignity. Then let's get to work, I said, reaching for the laptop. We have more stories to tell. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters as I walked up, flanked by Hugo and Milton. Behind us came a line of people, families we'd found through Robert's letters, all victims of Forrest's schemes. Mrs. Gomez! A reporter thrust a microphone toward me. Is it true more victims have come forward? 23 families, I replied, stopping at the top of the steps. 23 lives destroyed by one man's greed. Inside, the courtroom was already full. Lauren sat in the front row, wearing significantly less expensive clothes than the last time I'd seen her. She wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. All rise, the bailiff called out. Forrest was led in, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his usual tailored suit. He looked older, smaller somehow. His eyes locked with mine for a moment before darting away. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, we've uncovered evidence of systematic fraud spanning 3 decades. Mr. Grant didn't just steal money, he stole futures, dreams, entire legacies. One by one, people stood to tell their stories. A retired teacher who lost his pension, a young widow whose insurance payout vanished, a family who lost their restaurant of 4 generations. When it was my turn, I walked to the witness stand with my head high. Robert wrote you letters for years, I said, looking directly at Forrest. He believed you were still his friend, that you had a conscience. Objection, Forrest's lawyer jumped up. Relevance? Overruled, the judge said. Continue, Mrs. Gomez. I found this in one of his letters. I held up a faded photograph. It's you and Robert at our wedding. He was your best man. How do you go from that to destroying someone's life? Forrest shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, I saw shame in his eyes. The prosecution would like to enter new evidence, the DA announced. Emails between the defendant and his daughter, planning to use her marriage to fraudulently obtain Mrs. Gomez's property. Lauren burst into tears. Josephine, sitting several rows back, didn't move to comfort her. Your Honor, Forrest's lawyer stood. My client would like to address the court. Forrest shuffled to the podium, his handcuffs clinking. I got lost, he said, his voice rough. Each deal got bigger, each lie easier. Robert trusted me, and I betrayed that trust. All these people trusted me. Save your performance, Milton called out. We've seen enough acting from your family. Order, the judge warned, but I saw her hide a small smile. The DA stood again. Given the extensive nature of these crimes and the new evidence, we're seeking the maximum sentence on all counts. No, Lauren jumped up. Daddy, tell them about the money, the accounts in Switzerland. The courtroom erupted. Forrest's lawyer looked like he might faint. Miss Grant, the judge's voice cut through the chaos. Are you admitting knowledge of hidden assets? Lauren's face went pale as she realized what she'd done. Josephine finally moved, but only to put her head in her hands. Your Honor, the DA smiled, we'd like to add tax evasion to the charges. The sentencing took less than an hour. 25 years, no possibility of parole. Full restitution to all victims. Every hidden account seized. Outside, reporters swarmed again, but this time I was ready. Today isn't about revenge, I announced. It's about justice, about standing up and saying enough is enough. Mom, Hugo called out. Look, a group of people was gathering at the bottom of the steps. More families, clutching newspapers and documents. Are you Mrs. Gomez? A woman stepped forward. We think we might be victims too. Different company names, but the same pattern. Of course they are. Josephine's voice came from behind us. She walked down the steps, her designer purse replaced by a simple leather bag. I have all the records, every deal, every fraud. I'm ready to testify. Lauren stared at her mother in horror. Mom, what are you doing? The right thing, Josephine replied. Finally, I looked at the growing crowd of people, all carrying stories of loss and betrayal, then at my sons, standing tall and proud, at Jillian, already organizing people into groups, taking down names and details. Let's get to work, I said. There's more justice to be done. As we walked down the courthouse steps, Hugo squeezed my hand. Dad would be proud, Mom. He is proud, I replied, touching the wedding ring I still wore, and so am I, of all of us. Behind us, I heard Lauren wailing about her ruined life, but her voice was drowned out by the sounds of people coming together, sharing stories, finding strength in numbers. Sometimes revenge isn't about getting even. Sometimes it's about standing up and showing the world that truth still matters, that justice is still possible, and that no amount of money can buy what really matters: integrity, family, and the courage to do what's right. 6 months after Forrest's sentencing, I stood in front of the old downtown lot, watching construction crews tear down the abandoned buildings. Hugo and Milton flanked me, both wearing hard hats. The community center plans look amazing, Milton said, unrolling the blueprints. Computer lab, job training facilities, daycare for working parents. And look who's here to see it. Hugo nodded toward an approaching car. Josephine stepped out, looking different in jeans and a simple blouse. The past months had stripped away her artificial polish, revealing something more genuine underneath. The last of the restitution payments went through this morning, she said, joining us at the fence. 28 families made whole again. How's Lauren? Hugo asked quietly. In rehab, again. Josephine sighed. She's still angry, still blaming everyone but herself. But at least she's getting help. A familiar voice called out behind us. Mrs. Gomez, Channel 7 News. Can we get a statement about the community center? Actually, I smiled. I have something better to show you. I led them inside the construction zone, where dozens of people were gathering. Families we'd helped, wearing hard hats and carrying shovels. Today isn't just a groundbreaking, I announced, cameras rolling. It's a rebirth. Every person here was affected by corporate fraud, by people who valued profit over people. Now we're taking that pain and building something beautiful from it. Mom, Milton whispered, pointing to the site entrance. More cars were pulling up, families spilling out, carrying more shovels, more hope. The crowd grew until it filled the lot. Is this really happening? A woman asked, the same one who'd approached us at the courthouse. Are we really taking back what they stole? Better, I replied. We're creating something new, something they can never take away. The first shovel hit the dirt, then another and another. People who'd lost everything were now building something together. Mrs. Gomez, another reporter called out. What about the luxury condos that were planned for this site? The potential profits? Some things are worth more than money, I said, picking up a shovel. Like community, like justice. Josephine stepped forward, her voice carrying over the crowd. I'd like to make an announcement. I'm donating all my remaining assets to the Community Center Trust. It's time this money helped people instead of hurting them. The crowd cheered. Hugo hugged her, whispering something that made her eyes water. Look! Milton pointed to the street. A police car had pulled up. 2 officers stepped out, escorting a familiar figure. Lauren? Hugo breathed. She looked different, thinner, less polished, but somehow more real. The officers removed her handcuffs. She's been granted supervised release to participate in the community service program, Josephine explained. It was her idea. Lauren walked toward us slowly, her eyes on the ground. When she reached us, she finally looked up. I'm sorry, she said simply, for everything. I want to help make it right. Hugo handed her a shovel without a word. She took it, hands shaking slightly. The foundation goes here, Milton showed her, marking the spot, for the children's library. Lauren nodded and began to dig, tears mixing with dirt. Jillian appeared with coffee and donuts for everyone. Just like old times, she grinned at me. Remember when we used to bring these to Robert at his construction sites? He would have loved this, I said, watching the community come together. He always said buildings were just shells. It's the people inside them that matter. A small girl tugged at my sleeve. My mommy says you helped us get our house back. Can I help dig too? I found her a small garden spade, and soon she was working alongside Lauren, both of them focused on the task at hand. You did it, Mom, Hugo said, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. You got justice for Dad, for everyone. No, I corrected him. We did it, all of us. The sun climbed higher as we worked, transforming a place of broken dreams into something new. Reporters filmed as former victims became builders, as enemies became allies, as pain turned to purpose. What are you going to call it? Someone asked. I looked at the blueprint, at the space where the sign would go. then at my sons, at Josephine and Lauren working side by side, at all the families whose lives had been shattered and rebuilt. The Phoenix Center, I decided, because sometimes the most beautiful things rise from the ashes of what was lost. As if in response, the crowd began to dig faster, harder together. We weren't just breaking ground, we were breaking cycles of greed, of revenge, of pain. We were building something that would last longer than any fortune, hope. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Phoenix Center drew hundreds of people. As I stood at the podium, the morning sun caught the building's glass walls, making them shine like fire. "Cut it, Mom," Milton urged, holding out the giant scissors. But I shook my head, scanning the crowd. "Not yet. We're still missing someone." A murmur rippled through the gathering as a prison transport van pulled up. Two guards escorted Forrest out, his orange jumpsuit stark against the festive atmosphere. "Thank you for agreeing to this," I said as he approached, his shackles clinking. "I didn't have much choice," he replied quietly. "The parole board made it clear, show genuine remorse or stay inside. That's not why I invited you." I gestured to the building. "Look around, really look." The center bustled with life. Through the glass walls, we could see people setting up computer stations, stocking the library shelves, preparing the daycare rooms. Lauren was there, showing a group of kids how to use the art supplies. Josephine organized job training schedules at the front desk. "All these people," I continued, "they were your victims once. Now they're rebuilding their lives. Some are even rebuilding yours." Forrest's eyes found Lauren, watching her laugh with the children. "She seems different." "She is. We all are." I handed him one end of the ribbon. "Hold this." The crowd went silent as I raised the scissors. "This center stands as proof that justice doesn't have to end with punishment. It can lead to transformation." Snip. The ribbon fell, and applause erupted. As the guards led Forrest inside for the tour, Hugo appeared at my side. "Did you see who else came?" I followed his gaze to the back of the crowd. Robert's old business partners, the ones who'd survived Forrest's schemes, stood together. They raised their hands in greeting. Inside, the energy was electric. People moved from room to room, exclaiming over the facilities. The computer lab hummed with new machines. The job training center already had a waiting list. "Mrs. Gomez?" a small voice piped up. The little girl from the groundbreaking ceremony stood there, clutching a book. "Will you read to us? We're having the first story time." In the children's library, kids sprawled on colorful cushions as I opened the book. Through the window, I could see Milton showing Forrest the wall of success stories. People who'd rebuilt their lives after losing everything. "The phoenix rises from ashes," I read, not because it forgets the fire, but because it knows that new beginnings are possible. "Even for me?" Lauren's voice came from the doorway. She'd been listening, her eyes wet. "Especially for you." I patted the space beside me. "Come read with us." As Lauren took over the story, I slipped out to find Josephine at the front desk. "The first job training class is full," she reported, "and 3 of our people already have interviews." "Good." I watched Forrest being led back to the van. He paused, looking back at the center one last time. Sometimes the hardest part of justice is seeing its impact. "Mom," Milton called from the computer lab. "The virtual counseling program just went live. We've got people logging in from across the country." The day flew by in a blur of moments. Hugo teaching a business ethics class, using his own experience as a cautionary tale. Lauren organizing art therapy sessions. Josephine mentoring women returning to the workforce. As evening fell, I found myself alone in the main hall. The setting sun painted the walls in shades of orange and gold, like the phoenix itself was watching over us. "You did good, Robert," I whispered, touching my wedding ring. "Your letters led us here." "Mom!" Hugo and Milton appeared, carrying coffee. Everyone's gathering in the community room. They want to thank you. No, I shook my head. This isn't about thanks. It's about transformation, Lauren finished, joining us. That's what you taught me. Us. We walked to the community room together, where dozens of families waited. People whose lives had been shattered now stood tall, proud, ready to help others rise. To new beginnings, someone called out, raising a coffee cup. To justice, added another. To family, Hugo said, squeezing my hand. I looked around at all these people, victims turned survivors, enemies turned allies, broken dreams transformed into new purpose. To the phoenix in all of us, I said softly, may we always rise, stronger than before. Outside, the building's glass walls reflected the sunset, burning bright against the darkening sky. Not an ending, but a continuation. Not revenge, but renewal. And somewhere, I knew Robert was smiling.